straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily.
I didn't intend to kill them. I intended to stop the people who were attacking me.
A self-defense law gets backing from multiple states, named after recently acquitted Kyle Rittenhouse, and the betrayal of Anne Frank.
It was what would be my longest investigation of my career.
Hear from the retired FBI investigator who may have cracked the case. Plus, the courtroom gets heated as Theodore Edgecomb stands trial for murder.
Your paralegal stays out. She's now a potential witness on 2 times. She's out for the rest of the trial.
But first, the FBI gives a final update into the death of Gabby Petito investigation. What messages inside Brian Laundrie's notebook revealed. Law and Crime Daily covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian Buckmeyer along with Terry Austin. 5 months after Gabby Petito's story captivated the nation, the FBI announces Brian Laundrie is the only person responsible for her death. On Friday, the FBI released its final update on the investigation, saying messages inside Brian Laundrie's notebook reveal he is responsible for Petito's death. The notebook was recovered in October near Laundrie's partial remains. Investigators discovered the remains at the Carlton Reserve in Florida, more than a month after he went missing. Officials confirmed Laundrie died by suicide. The remains of Gabby Petito were discovered a month earlier near Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. Officials determined her cause of death to be strangulation. This came weeks after Petito was reported missing following a nationwide road trip she took with fiancé Brian Laundrie. In a statement released on Friday, the FBI in Denver said in part, quote, "All logical investigative steps have been concluded. In this case, the investigation did not identify any other individuals other than Brian Laundrie directly involved in the tragic death of Gabby Petito." We're joined today by Law and Crime legal analyst Dina Dahl and co-host Terry Austin. Dina, does this mean Brian Laundrie's parents will not face charges? And is there any other sort of resolution we could see here?
It doesn't appear that they'll be facing charges. I mean, for one, they now know who actually killed her, and it was their son. It's possible that they committed some things like obstruction of justice. That's unclear, too, based on what we know. Even if they did, though, I think it's unlikely that they would bring any charges with the case so closed as it is. It is possible that Gabby's family could file civil lawsuits. I mean, they would have a wrongful claim against the son, which with him passed away, and it's unknown whether or not he has any assets they can go toward. It's also possible that they could sue the parents for an intentional infliction of emotional distress. Whether or not they can prove that would be difficult, but it's less of a burden than any kind of a criminal prosecution against the parent.
Absolutely. Possibilities, but somewhat speculative. We'll have to see if more information comes up. Terry, there are still a lot of unanswered questions in this case. Do you think investigators will ever release what was written in Brian Laundrie's notebook?
Well, hopefully one day we will have the opportunity to see what is in that notebook. Dina mentioned the fact that even though there are no criminal charges which could be brought against Brian Laundrie's family, I definitely think that some civil charges could be brought. The wrongful death might be a little bit difficult because there's no evidence, at least according to the authorities, that the parents were involved with the death. But I do think that intentional infliction of emotional distress, that's not the first time I've mentioned that, could be brought. And so I think get that discovery, get the depositions, see what's in that notebook, I think for peace of mind of the parents and of the public in general.
All right, we'll see where the facts and the lawsuits lead us in this case. This may not be the last time we hear the name Gabby Petito or Brian Laundrie. Thank you both. This week on Prime Crime, a story people are still talking about nearly 2 decades later. Host Jesse Weber delves into the Scott Peterson case. He joins us now with a look ahead. Jesse?
Hey there, Brian. On our next episode, we cover the big one, the case that arguably started it all in true crime. I'm talking Scott Peterson. This is the California man who went on trial for the murder of his pregnant wife, Lacey, and their unborn son, Connor. Now, the nation was captivated by all aspects of this case, including the way that Peterson behaved and what he said in his infamous police interrogation tape.
You've been married 4 years.
Yeah. 4 or 5. I guess it's 5. I think they were married in 97.
So you were married in 97?
I believe so.
I didn't make much of the tape. Scott was calm, in control. Keep in mind, he never confesses to anything. He gives his version of events.
But this case isn't over. There are developments happening even to this day. Tune in to Law and Crime.
Thanks, Jesse. You can catch this week's episode of Prime Crime Friday night at 5:30 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time here on Law&Crime Network. Still ahead on Law&Crime Daily, eyewitness testimony as the victim's wife takes...
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law & Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law & Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law & Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law & Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
Welcome back. A retired FBI agent who led a team of cold case investigators in trying to figure out who turned in Anne Frank to the Nazis says there could be more to come. Law & Crime's Anjan Levy spoke with Vince Pankow about how the new book detailing the years-long investigation began.
Brian, this is one of the 20th century's most enduring mysteries. How did the Nazis find out about the hiding place of Anne Frank and 4 other Jews, along with Anne Frank's family? Now, the book, The Betrayal of Anne Frank, was released earlier this week, days after a 60 Minutes story detailed the work of Vince Pankow and the team of investigators. They used artificial intelligence to sift through thousands of documents and came upon an anonymous note sent to Anne Frank's father, which said a Jewish lawyer named Arnold Vandenberg was the one who tipped off the Nazis to the address. Vandenberg was a member of the Jewish Council, tasked with implementing Nazi policies. Many people have been suspected in telling where the address was over the years, but Pankow and his team believe that Vandenberg is a likely suspect.
What is the reaction that you've received so far to this information about who you suspect turned in Anne Frank and her family?
Well, the reaction is overwhelmingly positive. So many people were wanting to read the book. They saw the 60 Minutes piece. We did have a few detractors, which we suspected right away, who we don't even think have read the book yet. But we're hoping to get the message out that people can understand the theory. We're not the first to break this theory, though. This information was out there. And like in a lot of cold cases, we came across it and just wondered why nobody ever followed up on it in the past.
Do you think there's more work to be done on this, more follow-up after the book is released and people maybe read it? And will there be more to come?
We've already received messages from people that they might have more information. We always have likened this to this giant puzzle that AI even was brought in to help us try to keep it organized and sort through all the pieces. We say that the puzzle is showing us a clear picture now, but there are still missing pieces of the puzzle. And we hope that with some of the information that comes in, it can fill in those missing pieces.
So the message there really is stay tuned to see what else they are able to come up with. Now, Pankow says he and his team have not yet met that beyond a reasonable doubt threshold. And he said, you know, they really didn't intend to. This is simply what they came up with over that nearly 6 years of investigation. Brian?
Thanks, Anjanette. Let's bring back legal analysts Dina Dahl and Terry Austin as we dig into the facts of Anne Frank's betrayal. Terry, as new facts are added to the inquiry of Anne Frank's death, where do you think the investigation needs to go next?
Brian, you know, this is a very important historical case. It really is like a cold case, so every single lead needs to be pursued. I think the next step is more forensic technology. It can uncover even more details and even more leads. I think they should be looking at every single written document. They should trace ancestral records. They should interview, obviously, anyone who's still alive at this time. Any live witness, I think, can lead to other information. And one of the things I mentioned before when we talked about this is the purpose of all of this is not just for the sake of doing it, but for the reason that you don't want this to be repeated. We need to learn from our history.
Yeah. Dina, the circumstances surrounding the death of Anne Frank have always been circumstantial. Now, does this new information give us more questions than answers, or the other way around about this historic case?
You know, in terms of a court of law, kind of like Anjanette was saying, they're not intending to prove this beyond a reasonable doubt. If we were discussing one of our live trials and there was an anonymous note, we would say, sure, that's a piece of evidence, but is that enough to convict somebody? No. So we're talking a little bit like that here. Interestingly, Anne Frank's father knew about this note years before, but he chose to never speak about it because he didn't know if it was true and he didn't want to so damage the reputation of the person because he has children. So obviously this book is doing a deeper dive. This note obviously has some effect, but does it prove that it is this person? Again, in the court of law, I don't think it would be enough.
All right, more digging needs to be done. And Jeanette, if Vandenberg is the person who turned over the address, why does Pankow believe he would have turned on other Jewish people?
Well, it was a difficult time. I mean, people were being sent off in trains to Auschwitz and other concentration camps on a daily basis, and Jews knew what was going on. In the very beginning, they may not have known, but word got out, and people understood that this was basically the Nazis' final solution to eliminate Jews. So they believed basically that people were in terrible positions and they were probably turning on one another in order to save themselves and their families. So it was just an awful thing that was going on, and Vince Pankow and his team want people to really think about what that would have been like to be put in such a position.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a devastating time. You bring up Auschwitz. I actually has visited the internment camps in Auschwitz. It's a complete tragedy, something I think everyone should be reminded of. As Terry said, a history we do not want to repeat. Thank you all. Coming up on Law and Crime Daily, a 19-year-old setting the precedent for a possible new law. How the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict could impact cases in the future as lawmakers propose a bill with his namesake. Plus, a blow-up in Wisconsin when the judge in the Theodore Edgecomb murder trial throws a paralegal. Welcome back. First-hand testimony on Friday as the victim's wife takes the stand in the murder trial of Theodore Edgecomb in Wisconsin. But the highlight of the morning, the judge kicking out the defense team's paralegal just before cross-examination, as a second incident makes her a potential witness. Take a listen.
First of all, counsel, start by identifying them.
Your Honor, it is the screenshot of Mr. Jason.
And who got these screenshots?
It's publicly available online.
Tell me who got the screenshots.
We got the screenshots.
Who? Stop saying we. Who?
The defense counsel, the paralegal Ashley just printed them out just a couple minutes ago.
Ashley who? Then again, Ashley is a witness in this case. Step out for the rest of this trial.
The defense team was trying to introduce screenshots of the victim's Facebook page, claiming his wife's testimony opened the door to speak on his character after she said he was peaceful. In testimony Thursday, there was conflict with the same paralegal after a witness said the paralegal told him she was a police officer. Edgecomb was charged with the shooting death of Jason Clearman when the two got into an altercation on the road back in 2020. Prosecutors say Edgecomb was on a bicycle when he punched Clearman, a passenger in a car, through an open window. Clearman's wife, Evangelina, was driving at the time. Video shows the couple followed Edgecomb onto a bridge as he rode away. Clearman got out of the car. That's when Edgecomb shot him. Edgecomb was arrested 6 months later in Kentucky. He's claiming it was self-defense. On Friday, prosecutors asked Evangelina about the interaction her husband had with Edgecomb.
This man on the bike came up to the car to punch him. We didn't do anything. I just swerved around him. My husband said, "What the heck?" And then he comes up and he punches my husband. So all this is happening. I'm thinking, why did this happen? So as my husband is approaching the bicyclist is, he's looking at me and looking at him, and he had these really dark, cold eyes, and he was staring at me. All I saw was this man's eyes and the gun. And then I knew he was going to shoot my husband. I could just feel it. And then he pulled the trigger on his head. And then he looked at me. He kept looking at me. Actually, he never took his eyes off of me. And I felt like he was contemplating on shooting me next.
Dina, kind of looking ahead, at the end of the trial, Mrs. Clearman will likely be considered an interested witness. What does that mean, and how will that affect her testimony?
I mean, clearly she is interested. You know, she was participating in the event. She drove the car that the defendant is claiming was chasing him. So the jury is going to weigh that. She's not impartial like maybe some other witnesses are there. And essentially, a lot of this is going to come down to credibility. It's not the first altercation, evidently, that the defense says where the car swerved and almost hit him isn't on video. You know, this offensive language, which he said isn't on video. A lot of this is he said, she said, and even though the defense isn't saying it, his attorney is, and they're going to weigh all of that to see who they believe.
Yeah, and to that point of the offensive language, it's going to be interesting because that offensive language has to do with race, and now we see that Clearman's wife is a woman of color. Should be interesting. I'm just throwing it out there. Terry, how do you see Ms. Clearman as she held up on the stand, especially during cross-examination?
Well, she was clearly nervous, even on the direct examination. But on cross-examination, this was really one of the most tense cross-examinations I've ever seen. Very, from the start, defensive. She didn't want to answer questions. She said, I don't understand. Can you please repeat it? Can you please rephrase it? And so it seemed as though she is interested. She definitely wants to give the defense as difficult a time as possible. So we'll see what happens, but he's pulling teeth at this point.
Yeah, pulling teeth would definitely be a way I would describe it, but it's understandable. You have to understand what this woman went through. She saw her husband, in her mind, murdered in front of her. Now, the trial is expected to wrap up on Monday. Make sure to watch the Law and Crime Network for more gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Theodore Edgecomb murder trial. When we come back, the Kyle Rittenhouse case is still making headlines after his acquittal last year. Now, several lawmakers propose a bill to be named after the 19-year-old. We'll discuss how the new law would work if passed. Welcome back. Fresh off the heels of Kyle Rittenhouse's monumental acquittal, lawmakers in 2 states have proposed a bill named after the 19-year-old. The proposed bill, backed by politicians in Tennessee and Oklahoma, would be called Kyle's Law and would require the state to reimburse people who have been acquitted by self-defense. That includes things like legal fees or wages lost because of the ongoing litigation. This week, Dan Abrams, host of Dan Abrams Live and founder of the Law and Crime Network, spoke with Tennessee State Representative Bruce Griffey, who wrote the bill, and a proclamation to honor Rittenhouse as a hero.
Anyone who's acquitted can make those exact same arguments, and the people who are going to be supporting you on that are going to be criminal defense attorneys around the country who I'm guessing you probably don't agree with on a lot of issues.
Well, and look, I trust the jury systems, and if you have a jury unanimously come back and say this prosecution should never have taken place, that's the situation I think a defendant should be entitled to get some compensation from the state. If the jury, because there's a difference between proof beyond a reasonable doubt and then, just by preponderance. They could find a defendant not proof beyond a reasonable doubt for a number of reasons. The state just did not get there. That doesn't mean a defendant isn't, might have violated the law and doesn't deserve compensation. But if you give the jury the ability to consider the case and say, should this prosecution have ever taken place? Should we have been brought in here to court and waste our time on this case? And the jury comes back and says, no, I think that's an appropriate case for the court and the state to step in and go, you should be compensated for how you were treated.
I mean, to your point, Dan, here's one public defender who will support that in New York. Dina, Washington State has a law like this on the books. Can you explain how this law would work if implemented in Tennessee and Oklahoma?
I mean, essentially, anybody could already sue for malicious prosecution, and if they win, get damages, regardless of this law. But what the Washington state law and other bills do is make it easier. In the same trial as the acquittal, the jury, the same jury, would decide whether or not they would be entitled to damages. So they wouldn't have to bring a separate lawsuit. And what it means is that if, like the legislator was saying there, if they cannot say that beyond a reasonable doubt he did it, but he probably did it, then they wouldn't have to pay out damages. But if they couldn't prove that he probably did it without self-defense, then he would. So it's the difference between a civil standard, which is the predominance of evidence, and beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the criminal. They're conflating the two into the one trial, essentially.
Yeah, Terry, in listening to Representative Griffey, I couldn't really make heads or tail as to why this law was needed. When there's already a legal recourse for prosecutor misconduct, it made it seem like this was more him trying to attach his name to Kyle Rittenhouse than create a new law. Did you understand why this was happening?
Well, I guess, as Dina was saying, to make it easier, but I think we already have an action for malicious prosecution, and you can do that in a civil case or a criminal case, and I don't think you need to have a separate law to do that. So I think the damages would be the same.
Absolutely. We'll see how it plays out. Well, thank you for joining us here at Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America.